Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of How I Raised My First Million podcast by Asian Hustle Network. Today we have a very special guest, the founder of Plenty. Her name is Emily, and I just love her energy, right? She's just so enthusiastic, the way she talks about her business. And today we have a really special episode on fundraising, right? As you guys know, the theme of this podcast is How I Raised My First Million. And we're going to be asking Emily a bunch of questions on how she raised her first million. So Emily, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course, Emily. I love the mission of Plenty, which is the wealth platform for modern couples. I think it's a fantastic idea, right? And you guys were able to, according to Crunchbase, recently or last year raised $2.8 million. I know that you have another special announcement to make during the podcast itself, and I know you guys were able to raise in January 2022 for your
Mhm.
company. Walk us through the process. How did you get started fundraising? Because I know for most founders, fundraising is the most challenging process of creating a company, right? Walk me through what was
Mhm.
going through your mind in like January 2022.
Yeah. So for me, our fundraising story started long before the idea for Plenty ever came about, or even we incorporated or decided to build the company. Because actually, a lot of the relationships that we had for investors that came on were relationships that I've had for 2 to 10 years. And so they were people that I either used to work with, people that I just got to know because I thought they were good people doing interesting things. So when it came January 2022, we knew that there were so many things that were broken in the financial system, especially if you don't come from a background where you know what to do with money or you come from money. And we knew that was something that we wanted to solve in a company. And so we actually started off by going to people who we had the closest relationships with. And frankly, part of the conversation at the time was we were like, I think we have some ideas about what the product could look like. We know we want to serve millennials because we know they're underserved. We want to serve people who are early on in building wealth, but we're still going to figure out and do a lot of testing and prototyping to figure out what's the best product experience and what's the best way to support them. And that was actually one where I was even surprised. I had a couple of these conversations, and a few people that I'd known for the longest period of time, they were like, I'm in. Count me in for 100,000, count me in for 250,000. Like, I'm going to back you. You come from a long time in fintech. So if someone's going to figure it out, it's probably someone who comes from fintech experience.
No, that's awesome to hear, right? And that's good for us to know as well how some of these relationships you built over the last 10 years. And
Mhm.
I know that building relationships is important for fundraising. How'd you get started with like the first question? Who was your first investor? How was the first email like? How long did it take you to prepare your deck? Like, how did you like break that mental barrier that it's okay for me to go out there and ask for money? Because I know for especially
Mhm.
with the Asian community, it's hard for us to ask for help. It's hard for us to
Mhm.
ask for money. So how'd you get through it emotionally, mentally, and so on?
Yeah, so great question. One of the things, so I started the company with my now husband. At the time, we were engaged. And before we even made the decision to start the company, we decided to spend a month working full time on the idea, just doing research to make sure that we've done the homework to convince ourselves that there was an opportunity here. And so that was actually really important for us because I think both of us are not the kind of people where without having done the homework, we feel confident. We're definitely kind of like, over prepare. I've done all of my homework. I've covered all of my bases. Then I can feel like I can speak about it authoritatively. And so we'd spent a month doing this research, interviewing other, potential customers, interviewing people in the financial planning industry, feeling like we had a very deep understanding of what was broken and what we could build better, especially with a software first experience. And so when we started working on the pitch deck, it really was bringing over a month's worth of research into that sprint. And actually, we've been thinking about the idea for months even before that. So it was bringing, almost half a year of experience that we had gained to really think about, okay, what are we solving for? How many people does this impact? What would a real business that, actually sustainably solves this problem, what could that look like? So then when we put together the deck and we had that first conversation with an investor, it actually felt much more straightforward because we were just so sure of what we knew and what we didn't know and what we were setting out to learn.
No, that's awesome to hear, right? This is how I can tell that you guys are able to raise such a successful round for your pre-seed and seed round, which is 2.8, which is a lot, by the way, for a pre-seed and seed round. So congratulations. And you know, your experience really shines through because I think what most founders, the first time founders, I think the biggest mistake is assuming that they have everything in place already. But the fact that you guys have your market research, you speak with conviction, you know what the clear problem is. I think as an investor, that's what we look for, right? As an investor, it's like we want to make sure that can we trust this person with to execute the idea and like to be successful and not give up. That is the one thing we look for, right? And I think that you guys have that. And I know this question doesn't pertain to the podcast particularly, but what is it like creating a company with your husband? I know I'm pretty sure you get asked that question a lot of times, but we understand, we hear from like our mentors, our parents, our mom and dad is like, be careful who you start a business with. Don't start a business with your friends. Don't start a business with your significant other. What is it like starting with your husband? I'm kind of curious.
Yeah, so I think we came at it from a different perspective, partially because of our upbringing. So my parents, they actually built a company together and they ran that for over 18 years. Channing, my husband, actually comes from a family business as well as a family law firm of personal injury lawyers. And they've actually built this firm for over 100 years where they've had a number of family members. And I think it's almost, I want to say 12 or 16 people in the family who have worked together successfully. So actually it was pretty straightforward because when we were first thinking about this, we actually went to my parents and to his family. We were like, what's the good, bad, and ugly? Tell me like the real scoop on what to avoid, what to be careful about, what are ground rules that are really important. So I think that was really important. We went in eyes wide open. And to that comment you made too, you know, about being careful about who you go into business with, I couldn't, you know, say like with more conviction that that is so completely true because one of the things that has been actually the easiest part about building the company together has been that probably the same things that you look for in a life partner in terms of values alignment. How do you treat people? What is your North Star? What are the things that drive us? There was already so much alignment there. So when it comes to pretty hard decisions or big decisions that we need to make as a company, we actually have so much more alignment that it makes it easier. Definitely, though, we've also had to figure out our own tactics because we spend so much time with each other where just like with any relationship, you got to keep it new and you got to keep it fresh. And so we've had to also develop our own muscle and our own tactics to make it fun.
No, I think that's fantastic, right? And you hit the nail on this head. I absolutely agree with that statement. Like whenever you go into a co-founder relationship, you're basically dating the other person, right? Because I think that's what people don't realize with starting a company is like there's no end to it unless you sell or unless you literally get a divorce, you know, which is
Yeah.
very unfortunate to hear. But yeah, I mean, going back to the theme of the podcast, so you reached out, you built relationships with your investors for 10 years and you reached out and you finally raised your first check, right? But I did notice that you have some key investors like Kevin Durant, Adam Nash. Like, how'd you even get those connections? Like, pitch to them. What was the pitch like? Like, what was the email like? What was going through your mind? And I'm just curious. Like, were you having butterflies in your stomach? Like, it sounds so fascinating to hear.
Yeah, I mean, I think for so many of these individuals, I followed them for so long that, of course, I was definitely nervous when I first had that call. And I think, you know, with so many of those two in particular, you know, with both of their teams, it actually was an introduction through another person who had gotten to know me over some time period, who then vouched for me, which is, I think, also a really important thing to understand for how this world works, which oftentimes is usually an introduction from someone who knows them and knows you, where they actually can make that connection. And I think, you know, the conversation with Adam Nash was incredible and so much fun because he cares so deeply about personal finance that he actually on the side teaches a course about personal finance to people in college. And I absolutely love that. And we just talked about all the things that were broken and needed to be done better and how we were shocked that it hadn't been fixed yet. And at one point, I remember this turning point in the conversation where he was like, oh yeah, like you care about this. And I was like, yeah, I do. Like life is so short that if you're going to spend time building something you don't deeply care about, that would be such a shame. So I think that was also, I think a really core part is just finding people who care about what you're doing and also share that it needs to be fixed or changed.
Yeah, I mean, it's awesome that you're able to engage in this conversation with their teams, right? I know it's
Mhm.
sometimes can be very intimidating. And the next topic I
Mhm.
want to talk about is imposter syndrome, right? As a first
Mhm.
time founder, you would like to know what you're doing, but most of the time you don't
Mhm.
know what you're doing. And I think I think it's important to like create internal systems to deal with these type of stress,
Mhm.
right? Because
Mhm.
everybody has them. We're just human,
Mhm.
right? And I think that this topic isn't talked about enough. How do you
Mhm.
deal with your imposter syndrome, especially as you're pitching to other investors and you have this vision in your mind, right? And you're trying
Yeah.
to properly lay it out, but it hasn't quite turned into reality yet. How do
Mhm.
you deal with your imposter syndrome?
I feel like been, dealing with my imposter syndrome my entire career. I started off working in venture when I was 20 years old. I'm Chinese, so not only was I 20, but I also looked very young. And so I think I also had this dynamic where at the time when I worked in venture, there was even more of a gender imbalance. And so at the time, early on in my career, the way that I handled that was, okay, well, I'm going to prove myself. I'm going to work harder. I'm going to do more. I'm going to get my CPA and my CFA designations because then people won't be able to guess quite as easily how young I am. And so these were all things that I'd done. But I think getting that experience, then when I ended up going to work at Stripe, I dealt with it all over again. I felt like at venture, I just crested to the point where I'd gotten more comfortable, and then I jumped to an even more unfamiliar environment by moving out to San Francisco to work for Stripe. And there, I was on a team where most of my team members were Harvard or Stanford MBA students. And not only was I younger, I also was, starstruck at the time where I was like, whoa, like they've done such cool things. What was really helpful about that experience, though, was that it you get to know them and you're like, you're human too. Oh, you like laugh at the same things. You get nervous as well. You also get nervous presenting. And all of these moments for me ended up helping me realize too that so many people, and it's actually a really great sign of the fact that you recognize that you have growth ahead of you, that you do have that imposter syndrome. I think right now, one thing that has been very helpful for me has been actually intentionally building a community of people who are other founders at a similar stage where it's been really helpful to even just have a group to be like, oh, that's normal. Like I'm struggling with this and I feel like I'm so dumb. I should know the answer already, or I should have figured it out. And not only is it more fun to have a peer group to talk to, but also, I think it makes it feel more normal and okay that actually my superpower is not having the answer, is the fact that I'm going to figure out the answer. And I might not figure it out the first time, but I'm going to keep trying.
Yeah, I love that too. I mean, I had a very similar experience myself. I was
Mhm.
able to join a company where all my teammates were from Harvard and Stanford, and after a while, you realize that, yeah, we are human, and that the one
Mhm.
thing that really separates us is really mentality and
Mhm.
mindset,
Mhm.
right? I think as human beings, I firmly believe that no one's smarter than anyone else. It's just a matter of
Mhm.
like, you want it bad enough to like acquire
Yeah.
that knowledge. And
Yeah.
I like that for you a lot. I think that it served you really well in your career. And I really like the fact that you talked about your imposter syndrome, right? The fact that everybody does have it, whether or not you like it or not, it's there. But I'm really glad that you're able to find a system around it.
Mhm.
And going back to the fundraising side, right? So you raised $2.8 million, and I want to hear about how the money was used initially, because I
Mhm.
think I want people to realize on the podcast is $1 million, $2 million for your startup doesn't really last that long, right? Especially living in San
Mhm.
Francisco, making your first few hires, your team is probably no bigger than a certain amount of people,
Mhm.
right? What was the first realization that you guys needed to spend the money that you guys raised efficiently and adequately? And how did you pivot? Like whenever you change your
Mhm.
idea or whatever, how does
Mhm.
that affect your team and morale?
Yeah, so I think for me, the thing that was super helpful was having Asian parents. And so you kind of learn being frugal very early on. And I think there was also one thing that my parents had taught me too, which was ultimately their framework for a business was you make more money than you spend. And so actually the venture dynamic is so much more unnatural in terms of thinking about a business, because you effectively get this large amount of money. It's not actually a loan, but it's basically a loan. And it's, for you to go build something that can then generate revenue. And so that was always a more interesting part, where I think I'd seen so many startups who I would consider, it's like you spend a lot very quickly, but you haven't given yourself enough time to prove things out. And you also haven't given enough time to learn. And I think that's actually one where when we were building the team, we had raised this money, and other startups actually that had raised at a similar time or even similar amounts, they'd grown their team very quickly. And we had been pretty intentional about why we were growing the team at each step. What had we proven? What had we not proven? Did we feel like we had proven enough about the product or the market or who we were focusing on? So we've earned the right to grow the team more. And so that's been a pretty helpful framework that we've continued even now after we just closed another round, is this very similar framework, which is let's grow enough that we can build quickly, but make sure that we're being very thoughtful, that we are proving something every step of the way and not hiring for a vanity metric.
I love that. That is very, very wise advice. Like speaking with other founders on this podcast, they all said similar things.
Mm-hmm.
I asked them what is the most riskiest part of an early stage startup. It's like over hiring, because they said when you're spending money to figure things out, that's the worst way to spend investor money, right? Mm-hmm. Because it never ends well. But if you have a system that's already proved out and you have a machine that semi works and you pour more oil on it, it's gonna work even better, right? And even on this podcast, I'm like, all right, Emily, let me know when the next round is. I'm ready to invest myself. I'm convinced,
I'd be happy to have you.
So I know you earlier, like you just literally mentioned that you just raised another round for your company. Congratulations.
Thank you.
What was different about this fundraising round compared to the first and second time?
Yeah, so in our first round of fundraising in 2022, it was when we were early in building out the product. And really the point of that fundraise was for us to feel like we knew what product and who to focus on, as we were thinking about this North Star of how do we make it easier for people to just manage their money and build wealth. And over the course of that first round, when we were, building out prototypes, testing with individuals, we got to this aha moment where we were like, wow, a lot of people really start to ask these big questions about what should we do? We want to buy a house. We want to have kids at the time when they start to manage money with their partner. One of the things, that we heard over and over that consistently felt like this, oh, there's something here, was we'd hear all these people earlier on in their 20s, and they would say, or even in their 30s, and they would say, yeah, I'm dating. And yeah, at some point we want to buy a house. And all of a sudden, the conversation turned at one point where we would start to talk to people and they're like, oh, we're engaged. We're married. We just moved in together. We bought a house together. And the conversation very quickly goes from at some point down the road, it'd be nice if we could do this, to all of a sudden what felt like this house in 3, baby in 5, like very strict timeline that suddenly came in. And then all of this pressure that came in because they're like, how do we do this? Do we have enough money? What do we need to be doing in order to get there? And so that was a really fun part of what we learned as part of that first round. And so what I'm really excited about is we had, some of these early proof points. We learned so much about who we're looking to serve and what product they ultimately need, that these were the insights that unlocked the next round of funding for us. And for us, what I'm excited about is to use this funding to really double down for Plenty to become this destination where if you're merging finances, we're just a no-brainer place where you can do everything in one place.
Absolutely agree with that statement. Right. I think as millennial myself, like this is a product I can relate to a lot because obviously our generation is always thinking about finances. This is just a very, very biased opinion. I feel like our generation is always shafted by the economy in every single way. So I really like that. So let's talk about this round of funding. Right. So would you consider this round a C plus or Series A? How much did you raise? I just want to hear like the the basic parts of it because it's not announced yet at all.
Yeah, so our first round of funding was our pre-seed and we raised that 2.8 million. And right now we just closed a new seed round that is a $5 million round. We're very excited about it. It gives us tons of capacity to build our team even more and to really prove out what we believe people need.
Wow, that is amazing. Like a $2.8 million seed round and a $5 million pre-seed and then a $5 million seed is this reminds me of 2021, by the way, where where all these crypto companies are raising $25 million for their seed round or Series A. I was like, what? That's crazy. But
Mhm.
yeah, I'm really happy to hear that for sure. So congratulations on everything. So one thing that I want to like talk about and to like narrow things down and give more perspective for first time founders is, you know, as we're going to this interview, you know, you are facing a lot of success in fundraising, which is
Mhm.
amazing, phenomenal. I want to talk about some of the failures that you had with
Mhm.
fundraising, right? I
Mhm.
want to hear some of the KPIs you had with fundraising, right? How many founders did you talk to? How many rejections did you get? Because that puts
Mhm.
things into perspective for all of us to know that, you know, regardless how
Mhm.
easy it sounds or how fantastic people are doing, there is a
Mhm.
struggle side to everything, right?
Oh, for sure.
And everybody needs to pay their dues. How many investors did you talk to secure your amount of investments? And that speaks largely to your character as a person as well.
hmm I mean, I think no, especially in this market, fundraising is not easy. And I will definitely not pretend that it was straightforward or easy at all. You know, there were so many moments when we were fundraising, we were like, are we going to get it done? Or is this going to be the final conversation that we need? And it's such a roller coaster of emotions because every check matters and you can feel like, oh, but you're a little bit out of control of that, right? And so we had over 120 conversations. And this was oftentimes, you know, when I'm still trying to run the company at the same time too. Fortunately, this is actually the thing that's really great about building a company with your partner is that there's so much more give. So Channing ended up focusing more on helping make sure everything was moving forward with the team, giving me really the ability to focus more on all of these other conversations with investors. And there would be weeks where I'd have days and I'd have 11 conversations and every single conversation I have, I'm introducing myself all over again. I'm introducing plenty. I'm bringing energy. It's every conversation is like it's my first time having the conversation of the day, even though it's my sixth time having the same conversation, walking through the same deck. But you got to bring that energy because if you're not excited, why should they be excited? But then, also one thing that I think you need to kind of just accept and embrace is you're going to get a lot of no's. And sometimes they're not even going to be good no's. I had one investor who was like, I really like you. I don't even know why, but it's going to be a no. And I was like, what do I do with that? You like me, actually, they even said they like the problem. They think there's a big opportunity here, but it's a no. And I was like, wait, normally it's really hard to get a check on you believe the problem exists, you believe the product is good, and you believe in us and me. And if all of those things line up, it's still a no. And you just kind of got to move on. And you got to get that rejection email and then an hour later hop back on another call and pretend like nothing happened. And you keep going with just as much confidence and gusto, even though internally you're a little bruised.
Oh man, that is very, very familiar experience for every founder, right? So rejection for you guys listening is very normal with fundraising. Just it's just a way of life, right? Just don't worry about it too much. Have a very short-term memory and just go out there and just be badass because at the end of the day, like the more that you pitch, it is a number game in some ways, right? The more that you
Mhm.
pitch, there are people out there that believe in you, they're like you, and
Yeah.
those are the people at the end of the day that do matter anyways. Don't worry about all the no's, right?
Yeah.
Don't even let the ego part get to you. Just go out there
Mhm.
and keep pitching. And the next question I have for you, Emily, is how do you keep yourself accountable to speak to that many investors? Because after a while, it does take a toll, and you do get tired,
Mhm.
right? Especially like you
Mhm.
said, right? Coming to every meeting, high energy, speaking about the same topic, introducing yourself, talking about your company, and so on. How do you keep yourself personally motivated? Right. I'm pretty sure you
Mhm.
have those moments where you turn to your husband, you're like, I'm tired. All right.
Mhm.
How do I keep going? But internally
Mhm.
there's a voice that tells you, Emily, keep going. How do you keep
Mhm.
yourself internally motivated?
For both Channing and I, and this is why sometimes when founders have asked, or had ideas and I've asked them, do you really care about this idea? Like, are there deep roots for why this problem means so much to you? And if they said no, I've been like, it is really hard to be a founder. It is really hard to start something and dream something into existence. And I couldn't even imagine how much harder it would be if I didn't authentically and deeply care about something existing. I think for me, what has been such a helpful North Star is Channing and I talk a little bit about this vision that we have where one day we will walk down the street, and maybe this is 10 years down the road, and we will just randomly bump into someone who do not know who we are, and they will tell us that they use Plenty. And they will tell us what a big difference Plenty has made and how it's just made it easy for them to figure out how much they needed to buy a house, and they bought a house. Maybe they now have 3 kids and they realized they could afford 3 kids because they put aside the money, invested it well, all because of our product. And that vision of having that conversation is so meaningful, especially when I think about, in the US, 44% of people come from minority backgrounds, where especially if you come from a minority background, it is so much harder to figure out what's the right thing to do when you don't know who to turn to. Your parents might not have had the right answers or had answers to some of the questions you now are facing. And as I think a lot about, what could really change, hopefully the trajectories of some of these families' lives and just make things easier. That for me is such a pure, like, this is why we're building this.
No, I'm completely touched by everything you said on the podcast so far,
Mhm.
right? Your passion, your vision, there's so much clarity compared to I mean, I speak to a lot of founders myself as I do a lot of investments, personal investments myself,
Mhm.
and you just speak with so much conviction, so much clarity. Like it's just so refreshing to have you on the podcast today. So thank
Well,
you.
thank you so much, Brian. I think also, this is thinking about what is the right idea is
Yeah.
something that I've wondered and thought about for almost 15 years. And
Wow.
it took a while to be like, no, this is it. This is the thing that I can spend decades of my life potentially building.
I love it. I love that mindset too. Like just continuous improvement, continuous building, seeing what you accomplish. Because everything that, in my opinion, that you do today will compound like 5, 10 years from now. And I feel
Mhm.
like you have laid out a path for yourself like years in advance, right? 10 years ago, 15
Mhm.
years ago, and so on. So congratulations on that. There's one topic that I want to talk about that really, to me, resonates a lot because I I personally put together a lot of events in the Asian Hustle Network for
Mhm.
women founder. You know, we have an event coming up
Mhm.
in New York City for a women empowerment event as well. I know that fundraising, especially as a minority woman, is not very easy, right?
Mhm.
And there's certain ways you need to, you know, control the room, quote unquote, or
Mhm.
seize control of the conversation. Have you ever felt during your fundraising process that people were not taking you seriously? And how did you like overcome those type of situations? Because it does happen, right? We hear a lot of horror stories
Mhm.
about fundraising, about, oh, you're such a doll. You look so cute. Borderline
Mhm.
like violating questions, right? Or
Yeah.
statements. Have you ever faced any of those? And like, how did you like deal with them as it came? And like, what was the first thought that came to your mind? You're like, oh my God, is this real? Is this reality?
Yeah.
Is this real? Like, what's going on? Right. So
Yeah.
like, I want to hear about your experience in that side.
Yeah. Fortunately, it was from a harassment perspective, I got a lot less than I used to get when I work in venture because my intro was I am building a company, Plenty, a wealth platform for couples with my life partner. So that, feels a lot right out the gate. It's kind of like you lead with the defense a little bit. When I worked in venture, definitely there were a lot of founders where they would be like, oh, we should get a drink afterwards. And I'm like, is this a talk business? It's really hard to figure out. Is this business or more? And so that was something that I think I've definitely experienced. Even when we were actually fundraising this first time around for the pre-seed, I'm not going to name names, but there was a New York based VC. And I was actually on the call. Normally, I do the pitch conversations on my own for that reason, because actually, I found that sometimes when I had Channing in the room, they deferred a little bit more to him. And so, I'm the CEO, he is our CTO. The business questions, it just makes sense because I've thought about that portion of the business a lot. And so it was actually helpful for me to really, control that conversation and really direct that to, hey, I can actually answer these questions more naturally when I was the primary person leading those pitch conversations. Also helpful for Channing and I, because it's very much a divide and conquer, where he thinks so much about the product, he builds so much and works so closely with our internal team, where that for us is also from a roles perspective, a really great divide there. But one of the conversations we had with this VC, so we were both on this pitch call, which we normally aren't. And this guy goes, so who's CEO and who's the boss? And, immediately Channing and I are like, we don't think of either of us as the boss, right? Or the manager at all. And he, Channing goes, well, Emily's the CEO. She spent the last decade plus like on the business side. This is really like what she's great at. And the guy looks at him and he goes, I can never report to my wife. And we're like, we're in the middle of a business conversation. I don't need to know personal dynamics of your relationship or your marriage, much less the way you talk about your wife, much less what you project as a key assumption onto our company and partnership. But the reality is, you're definitely going to run into people like that. And you're kind of like, thank God you showed this side of yourself, because we're definitely not going to want to work with you. Easy, move on. That's been something that's been really helpful. It's almost like you've helped me filter out who I want to work with, and I've just filtered you out. So that's also been like a really important framework when I have those situations come up where I'm like, great, there's so many people in this world who will be a great fit. You're just not one of them.
That is a good point to bring up, right? You don't have to accept every investor dollar that comes into, it's sometimes you prefer not to. And I know with most first-time founders, like, oh my God, you're investing in my company? You're amazing. I love it. Oh, we'll take it, but not every dollar that comes in is worth it because you have another voice in the room. And you have to think to yourself, are these group of investors going to help me build my vision in my company or take it away? Right. And there is a numerous experience with other founders on the podcast who have founder and investor drop out. So I think that brings up a really, really, really good segue that you don't want to accept every dollar that comes into your company. So Emily, as we were nearing the end of the podcast, can you believe it's been like almost 40 minutes? It's been so fast. What are your plans for yourself and for Plenty as you continue to go through this journey?
Well, we're really excited. We've just launched the product. So now anybody can come on, get your own Plenty account and start managing money with your partner. So we're really excited that we're now, fully available for anybody who wants, a little bit of help building wealth more easily. And as we think about the year ahead, it really is, thinking about what are the products that we can build to continue supporting couples to just make it easier to manage your lives. And so that's what we're really excited about. And we'll be doubling down on this year.
Amazing. And how big is your current team right now? And how much do you plan to scale in the next year or so?
Yeah, so we're going to be pretty thoughtful. So we work with a number of individuals that we've actually worked with before. Our team's currently 7 individuals, and we're going to about double the team this year.
Wow, that is remarkable. So I can't wait to check in with you guys again. Hopefully on season 2 of this podcast to see where things are at. I'm pretty sure the next time we have you on the podcast is going to be hey, I raised a Series C, a Series D, E, F, and so on. But we'll definitely be there to capture every single moment. So Emily, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. I guess, wait, I totally forgot there was one more question that I need to ask. And it's very basic of every podcast. So what advice do you have for first-time founders, especially women founder, first time going out there and fundraising for their company?
There's one of our investors, Helen Min from Phenomenal Ventures, was really incredible. I think she off the hand said this quote about finding your voice. And it really rang true for me, where it was, just something that I became more conscious about, where it was okay if I didn't figure out my voice right away. But part of my own journey of starting the company is figuring out what my voice is. And one of the most important places where you really see that is in these investor conversations. And so, especially I would say for people who feel like have a lot of that imposter syndrome, feel like you need to find reasons to believe. What I actually would do earlier on is write down like what are the reasons why I'm confident in what we're doing? What are the question marks that I have? And go into a conversation prepared with like, I'm confident for these reasons. I'm not sure about these things, but I'll figure it out. And just constantly remind myself, hey, I can bet that I will figure it out, even if I don't have the answer right now. And I really hope that, for other individuals, especially females who are out fundraising for the first time, just to remember, you probably have this figured out and you know a lot more than the person that you're talking to. And just remind yourself of that. And then just go in and kill it.
I love it. We're gonna definitely use that as our snippet for this podcast for sure. That is excellent advice, Emily. So the final question, Emily. So how can our listeners find out more about you, find out more about Plenty, and reach out to support you?
Yeah, well, we are at www.withplenty.com. That's how you can go and sign up for the product. And if you want to follow our journey too, we are on Instagram, TikTok, Pinterest, all of the different platforms. And we also try to actually make finance easy and understandable. So none of that hokey, jargony, long form, writing that you might have gotten through Google. But we generally try to also help explain and demystify topics of questions like, how much does daycare cost? Why do people hire nannies? And so we have all of this content as well on all of our platforms.
Amazing. We'll include that all in our show notes so our members can find out more. But Emily, huge pleasure having the show. Like, if anything, you probably convinced one more future investor to come into your your company. It's just so much clarity the way you speak about your experience. So thank you so much for being on the show today.
Well, really appreciate you having me.
Of course. Thank you, Emily.